Largely, I'm going to be talking from two pieces that we've done, monthly dossiers, one of them on the Congo. The Congo is, as most people I think already know, one of the richest places in the world. 2 trillion plus US dollars worth of minerals and metals, plus an enormous amount of arable land that could produce enough food to feed the African continent. Africa doesn't need to import food. The Congo itself has sufficient arable land. Also, it is a major lung to breathe the carbon that we put into the atmosphere. It has vast forests and so on. A really remarkable part of the planet Earth, what is now called the Democratic Republic of Congo, but in fact, the whole Great Lakes region of Africa, all the major lakes that are there in the center of Africa that connect Uganda, Kenya, the DRC, and so on. That region is extremely important to the world. And as I said, one of the richest countries in the world. Now, it also happens to be one of the places where the per capita income is one of the lowest in the world. And this is the classic problem, is the DRC is not a poor place. It's not poor. The people are not poor. This is an error. This is the classic colonial error to say that, Africa is poor, or India is poor, or, Brazil is poor. These are not poor countries. They are rich in various resources. They're also rich in human capacity, but there is a structure that effectively steals from the people their very wealth. They are not able to control their wealth. And that is the reason why, not only in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but in many African countries, this lack of sovereignty that the people have been able to exercise on their country, which goes back to the time when European conquest begins, the lack of sovereignty over their lands is actually the reason why these are rich countries with a population that just doesn't have an income. I mean, let's go back to the DRC. That region of the world was owned personally by King Leopold II of Belgium. He didn't own this on behalf of his kingdom. He owned it personally. It was his personal place. It's 60 times the size of Belgium. And he owned that personally. They just looted the wealth. They barbarized the people. They killed over 6 million people to terrorize them into fear so that they would work the land, produce rubber and so on for, King Leopold II and later for the Belgian government. Belgium, if you go there today to Brussels, Ostend and so on, those beautiful buildings in Belgium, they are all made by Congolese labor and the stolen wealth of the Congo. I mean, Belgium should actually unite with the Congo and should become a colony of the Congo today, just to give back what it has stolen. When in Belgium people say, well, we don't want these immigrants to come there. Well, if you don't want the immigrants to come there, send the money back. Send the money back. Send the wealth back. Then the immigrants won't come. We are just coming to claim our wealth back. So this theft of wealth produced a trade union movement in the Congo. Very strong national movement developed, led by Congolese people. This movement produced a number of leaders, among whom was Patrice Lumumba. Patrice Lumumba was one of the tallest leaders on the African continent. In fact, he befriends Kwame Nkrumah in Accra, Ghana in 1957 at a conference that Nkrumah organized to bring together the forces of, Pan-African socialist politics. And it's in Accra that Lumumba meets Nkrumah, he meets Frantz Fanon, he meets other important figures in the Pan-African socialist, unity, consciousness world. He meets them in Accra. Then Nkrumah begins to treat Lumumba as his mentor, mentee. He starts to mentor him, in effect, teaching this young man what it's going to mean to lead a country the size of the Congo. a vast country. Lumumba leads his movement very well. In fact, he is able to overthrow Belgian colonialism. At the handover ceremony, with the King of Belgium in presence, Lumumba gives an incredible speech in which he has one line which I would like you to remember. He says to all the people assembled, mainly to the Congolese people, but also to the King of Belgium, he says, "We are no longer your monkeys." He says, "We are no longer your monkeys." This is like what Thomas Sankara does 30 years later in what was then Upper Volta, when Sankara changes the name from Upper Volta, which is a ridiculous colonial name. Who names a country the other side of a river? It's a ridiculous name. He changes the name to Burkina Faso, the land of upright people. The land of upright people. We are not your monkeys, says Lumumba. The Belgians were very angry. Very shortly afterwards, the United States government, the British government, and the Belgian government collude with elites in the Congo, including Joseph Mobutu, to overthrow and kill Patrice Lumumba. Not only did they kill him, they dissolved his body in acid. They took souvenirs of his teeth and took it back to Brussels. Joseph Mobutu comes to power. He thinks he can con the people of the Congo. He changes his name to Mobutu Seko Seke, changes the name of the country to Zaire, Africanizes the colony. He pretends that he can fool the people, that if he calls it Zaire now, they'll think it's a free country. In fact, Joseph Mobutu, now Mobutu Seko Seke, was working for intelligence agencies of the West, allowing the wealth of the Congo to be taken out. When eventually Mobutu was overthrown and democracy was a possibility, when Joseph Kabila and others who had been revolutionaries, friend of Che Guevara, tried to build some sort of democratic system in the 1990s, a war breaks out. What? Where does this war come from? A war breaks out. There's a genocide in Rwanda. A war breaks out in the Great Lakes region. Millions of people killed. That genocidal situation in Rwanda, it's not just ethnic, it's about class, it's about imperialism, spills into the Congo. As we speak now, the M23 rebel group backed by the Rwandan government, it's called M23, it's named March 23, 2009, the day of a peace agreement. The M23 rebel group backed by Rwanda has taken the city of Goma in the eastern DRC. It is moving towards the capital of South Kivu province. That rebel force, 700 people dead, a small number compared to the millions who have died in this Great Lakes war, that's been there across the Great Lakes region of Africa. Meanwhile, big companies, Glencore, based in Switzerland, big mining companies from around the world, have been leeching the Congo, which is not able to establish its sovereignty, leeching the country of its rightful wealth, the coltan, which is used in our cell phones, the copper, the diamonds, all of that just stolen out of the Congo. I've been to the border between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda. Trucks just drive across. Nobody's checking them, carrying raw materials. And accountancy firms lie on behalf of capitalism. For instance, the price of coltan on Congolese soil is X amount of euros. The moment it crosses the border into Uganda, miraculously the price increases. And they do that so that they don't have to pay the Democratic Republic of Congo a higher amount of royalty. You see, if the price was deemed to be higher in the DRC, the royalty payment is higher. But instead, they underprice it in the Congo, drive the trucks to Uganda, drive it to the port, take it off, goes all around the world to be processed. Yeah. Eventually, it's in your phone. The phone is so expensive. But the Congolese miner, the person who's mining the coltan, often children, paid nothing. Violence is what greets them. This is the structure of imperialism today. You know, you can't understand what's happening on the African continent unless you understand this. You'll read the Western media. They will say, well, there is a fight happening in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, in Goma, this rebel group is there. And then they will get into an ethnic soup. They will say Tutsis, this, that, and the other. They would like us to believe that these fights taking place are ancient fights among the African people who are tribal. And because they are tribal people, they are settling tribal scores. This is not true. This is not some ancient tribal warfare happening, whether it's in the DRC or it's in Nigeria. These are not tribal conflicts. This is a very racist, wrong approach. Of course, there are ethnic tensions and ethnic divisions and so on that play into it. But that's not the root cause. It may play into it, but it doesn't define it. I'm not saying there's no ethnic issue involved, but the ethnic issue isn't the core of the conflict. It gets drawn into the conflict. It is secondary. It is not the primary issue. The primary issue is the impossibility for any African democracy to be created today. And let me just say this again. Impossibility of any African democracy. No African country right now, except a few that I'm going to name in a minute, no African country right now is able to exercise sovereignty, except, and this is important, except 3 countries in the Sahel region have had popular coup d'etats. It's again important to say against the Western media that the coups that took place in Burkina Faso, led by Ibrahim Traoré, in Mali and in Niger, in the Sahel region of Africa, just under the Sahara, these were not coups that were initiated from the military camp. There were mass public demonstrations against the presence of the French in these countries, fighting so-called Al-Qaeda, fighting so-called ISIS. We can talk later about this so-called ISIS because just 24 hours ago, Mr. Trump claimed to attack so-called ISIS in Somalia. The French intervened in 2013. They created the problem because they destroyed Libya in 2011. Then they intervened. There were mass demonstrations against the French presence. The military acted to basically support the mass demonstrations on the streets. Now these 3 countries have very bravely created the Alliance of Sahel States, the AES. They have walked out of the imperialist-controlled ECOWAS bloc, the Economic Community of West African States.
They did a few days ago.
They did a few days ago. Meanwhile, very interesting, in Senegal, where there was also a France Dégage movement, France Dégage movement, France Get Out movement, there was also Anything is Better Than This movement. A relatively progressive government was elected, even in Senegal. In Chad and Côte d'Ivoire, the government said the French have to leave. These are not progressive governments. So there is a tendency in the African continent to see people wanting to demand sovereignty. It's not that there is no move. And in the AES, Alliance of Sahel States, they have put the word sovereignty at the front. But not in Zambia, not in the Democratic Republic of Congo, not in Kenya, not in Uganda, and so on. I'm going to close up with this. Several years ago, Mr. Museveni from Uganda, who used to be a Marxist, was a student of Walter Rodney at the University of Dar es Salaam. Walter Rodney, being one of the great Pan-African scholars, wrote a terrific book called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. It's an absolutely marvelous book.
One of our favorite books.
Yeah, and he was assassinated for his pains in 1980 in Guyana. Mr. Museveni made a very interesting remark about 10 years ago. He said, look, the United States has been to the moon. They have a space program. The Europeans have a space program. In fact, their rockets take off from French Guiana, which is in South America. The Chinese have a space program. He says, where's the African space program? I thought this is a very good point. By the way, there was, if you don't know, there was a Zambian space program in the 1960s. A very interesting development. A good documentary was made on that. Museveni said, where is the African space program? When are we going to the moon? But then his next line is the line I want to end a little discussion with. Museveni said, we need to go there because we need to see what they are doing up there. In other words, what mischief are they getting up to? Well, Mr. Museveni, you who are creating all kinds of problems on the African continent, I would like to make a suggestion to you. Do you know, forget what the imperialists are doing on the moon. Do you know what the imperialists are doing on Earth? Are you keeping up with what the imperialists are doing in the DRC? How they have been stealing its wealth, and you have been colluding with them, allowing the DRC-Uganda border to be open, allowing the ports of Uganda to siphon out the wealth of the Congo, allowing Ugandan troops to enter into the eastern part of the DRC. Are we watching what they are doing to Africa? Or are we being misled by the BBC and allowing us to think that this is some age-old conflict that has been going on for centuries and will continue to go on because the African people are lesser than others? A racist view that the BBC constantly puts forward. What are we prepared to do? Are we prepared to fight for the truth? Or are we going to fall for their lies and be colonial captives forever? That's the question I want to leave on the table for our discussion.
Thank you very much, Vijay. Thank you very much for that.